Hello, everybody. My name is Krista Dillabaugh, and I am the director of the Morpho Institute. And I am just delighted to have you with us tonight. We've got lots of new people that are jumping in, as well as some folks that will be traveling with us to the Amazon. And this will be the last of our professional development webinars for the season, because we'll be heading into the field in late June. And then we'll pick back up again in August and September. So you'll want to make sure that you're signing up for upcoming webinars on our website, on our events page, and also probably sign up for our newsletter too, so you can stay in the loop on all things. If you've missed webinars in the past, or you're just learning about us, we do have a pretty robust YouTube channel where all of those recordings will live, including this one, that I am delighted to get to facilitate, or at least introduce, I should say, tonight. Two guest speakers from the Pacific Education Institute, Megan Rivard and Laura Turkarski. Sorry if I got that one slightly wrong. So short backstory here, I discovered field investigations and the Field Investigations Handbook that PEI is now responsible for distributing, in addition to many, many other resources that they have for getting kids outside. And it's just a perfect complement to what we do in the Amazon, largely because it took everything I was looking for as a field instructor and put it into a manual that made a great deal of sense. And it was things that we could do in the Amazon that immediately transferred back to the home classroom, into the home setting. So I got to know PEI a little bit better, met Megan and Laura and sat in on many of their webinars that they do when they're not out roaming around Washington State with kids having fun in the mud. And so we invited them to partner up with us and join us tonight so that Megan and Laura can give you a really nice overview of the field investigations process and their resources. And yeah, it's going to be a great night. Please just drop questions into the chat and I'll moderate that. I'm sure Laura and Megan will also offer lots of opportunities for Q&A, and I know they're very engaging presenters. So sit back and enjoy. And I'm going to stop screen sharing and let Laura take over.
Thank you, Krista. All right. What can you see? The right thing, hopefully.
Can see the right thing, yes.
Excellent. Well, we're really excited to be here. I'm just going to go ahead and advance to the next slide since you've given such a beautiful introduction. But I'm here with my colleague, Megan Rivard, who is the Central Washington Field STEM Coordinator for the Pacific Education Institute. And my name is Laura Tokarski. I am the Southern Puget Sound Region Coordinator for the Pacific Education Institute. And we're so grateful to have the opportunity to share a little bit about some of the work that we do, but more importantly, how this work, this guide, the work that you'll be doing, while many of you online tonight will be doing in the Amazon, connects to your work as part of your teaching practice back in your classroom. So before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the place from which I'm presenting is the traditional land of the Squaxin people. And we're a statewide organization. We work mostly in Washington State. And so for those of you that are new to Washington State, I live in Olympia, which is the very, very, very southernmost tip of what we call the Salish Sea, traditionally also known as Puget Sound. And this is the traditional land and water of the Stachas people of the Squaxin tribe. And this place for me is so important as it has held the footsteps of these people, this community. It's a maritime community that has really lived, along these shores since time immemorial. So our approach to education at PEI, Pacific Education Institute, is very much through this lens of place. And it's important for us always to honor the original, present, and future stewards of this land as such a critical element of our work. We work primarily with teachers and students, through that lens as well. But we recognize American Indian and Indigenous people as the longest serving stewards of this land, which was stolen. And as part of our work, a big thread is working toward respecting the sovereignty, the inherent sovereignty, the self-determination of the tribes, and really honoring tribal rights, including treaty reserve rights that exist off reservation. So we acknowledge, the historic and ongoing injustices perpetrated against Indigenous people in our area. We're committed to being conscientious. We work toward being as inclusive, learning how to be and being as inclusive as possible. And we really want to work with tribes to help establish trust and respect. So for me personally, it is most important to continue learning so I know how to challenge my own biases. I think about my work as an educator, and I want my words and actions to always be meaningful. And so this work as an environmental educator is about relationships, thinking about how we're interacting with each other, with our place, with the people that have been here. So before we move on, I wanted to share a resource, and this is something that is an important part of a lot of our, all of our introductions, thinking about this connection between people that have been here since time immemorial in place. And we're coming together, I believe, from many areas of the country tonight, if I'm not mistaken. And so I was thinking about something that could be a resource for us all, regardless of where we're patching in from tonight. So I just wanted to share the National Museum of the American Indian, the Smithsonian, has a really wonderful resource. The QR code that you see here in the upper right-hand corner is to the museum website for the Native Knowledge 360-Degree Project. And this is a really beautiful kind of like first stop or another stop as part of your work as an educator. There's a ton of resources that really just offer new perspectives on American Indian and Indigenous people, thinking through this lens of history and culture. So it's full of teaching materials. There is a ton of professional development for teachers and information about, national advocacy and partnerships. And one of the things I really love about this is that the professional development offerings are all recorded and they're all housed, and you can watch, any of them whenever available. And so there's a ton of really good information. And so if you're starting your journey, and thinking about how to connect with the Indigenous people in your area, or if this is, yet another step as part of that journey, it's definitely an amazing resource to check out. So definitely do that. And we're always available, to share our work and share ideas, and we'd love to have conversations as part of that continuing work. So I think I'm going to pass this back to Megan. Welcome again, folks. We're really happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you all. And my name's Megan, and like Lara said, I'm the Central Region Field STEM Coordinator for PEI here in Central Washington State. And here is what we're going to do. We're going to take the field investigations workshop that we normally do in 6 hours, and we're going to cram it into an hour and a half for you and try to make sure we get all the cool stuff so that you get really excited about using this resource out in the field with students. And we're going to do that by starting with an introductory phenomena. In science education, we do a lot of introductory phenomena and phenomena-based teaching. That's really wonderful for our field investigations. And so our introductory phenomena tonight is this. On March 15th, the Senate passed the Sunshine Protection Act of 2021, which would make daylight savings time permanent on November 5th, 2023. That's coming up. Now, here's the deal. In Washington, this is hotly debated, whether to have daylight savings time or standard time. It's back and forth. And we have looked at this as like a phenomenon because it's something we can all look at across the country, something we can all across the country see. Like we know when the sun rises and sets, and we know when we set those clocks forward or back, and we know how that impacts our students, and we know how that impacts people. There's a lot of data about what happens to people, how there's more car accidents, how there's more heart attacks, how there's more health issues that happen in that time where we've switched clocks either ahead or back. So if you go to the next slide, Lara, I caught you while you were drinking water. This poses a question of, should we be doing that? Should going forward back, should this be debatable? Should this be something that we do for people here in the United States? And so this actually gives us a great driving question of how do the patterns of sky and space impact human health, and what can we do to mitigate negative impacts? Now, if you're familiar with the next generation science standards, you'll see some colors here, some green, some orange, some blue. That should immediately make you think of those 3 dimensions of NGSS, which are the science and engineering practices, your disciplinary core ideas, and your cross-cutting concepts. Cross-cutting concepts being in green. looking at cause and effect, looking at patterns. Your disciplinary core ideas being in orange. That's like the actual content. So we're looking at the sky and space. We're looking at what's happening with our celestial bodies around us. And in the blue, what can we do? You'll see our science and engineering practice, solving problems, right? Asking questions and solving problems. So here we've got all of those 3 dimensions in this one question, and we're actually going to go out and do some observations here in a minute. But if you move forward the next slide, we take that driving question and we think, okay, here's this phenomena. We've observed that the sunlight changes at different times of the year. We've observed that in the United States, we do some clock switching. We've done those observations before. And we now have this beautiful question, but what questions do we need to answer before we can answer this driving question? How do the patterns of the sky and space impact human health? What can we do to mitigate negative impacts? So on the next slide, actually, before we go to the next slide, go back one, sorry. This is a really great tool to use in your classroom where you introduce a phenomena and a driving question. I would, of course, go much more slowly with students so that we can have time to process and think. But this is a really great strategy to use with students to get them to say, okay, here's this really big question, but I have so many things I don't know that I can't even begin to understand how to answer this question. That's great. That's really great. That shows you're using that science mind and you're using all of those ways of thinking and knowing. So in the classroom, you can use something like a wonder wall or a driving question board. And this is where students can actually write out their questions and put them in a visible spot in the room. I have a teacher that has these huge cabinets on the back wall, and they just fill them with sticky notes, like with all the students' questions. And they call that their wonder wall. And they just fill it. The whole thing is filled with student sticky notes, student questions. And they're all around that driving question. The really cool and powerful part is as students are progressing through a field investigation or through several activities at school, they can go back to that wonder wall and see if they can answer any of those questions. Because if they can take the sticky note off, write the answer on the back, and put it back on the wall. How cool is that? They become the experts. In our case, since we're all meeting digitally, I'm going to use a digital tool called Poll Everywhere. And in Poll Everywhere, you're just going to type either on a device or on the computer your answer, your question. This is Jeopardy. We're going to go for the question. So what questions do we need to answer first? In this case, how do the patterns of sky and space impact human health? And what can we do to mitigate those negative impacts? What do we need to know first? So what questions do you have before moving on to answer this question? And so now you can go to the next one, and we'll throw up that Poll Everywhere. I'm going to try to pull it up there. So that
Laura just dropped the link
clickable
chat for everybody.
Oops, and I spelled it wrong. I'm sorry. There we go.
Megan, do you want to share the results coming in somehow?
Let me see what I can do here. See how is my computer doing today?
You want me to stop sharing?
Okay, so far, no responses yet.
It might be good to repeat the question just to have it all in everybody's minds.
Yeah, so what questions do we need to answer before we can answer that driving question? And yes, you can stop sharing now, Laura, and I will share my screen.
And I see a comment from Laura in the chat that the link isn't opening. Is that the same for everyone?
I got in. You just have to use the one that let's just drop that in there again.
Yes.
I'll cut and paste. I'll copy and paste that and drop. I'm dropping it in again right now, folks, and this one should open up for you. It's the one I used.
Okay.
Oh, I see. I think mine's going in as an image for some reason.
Mhm.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, so you can see we've got 2 responses in there now. So
Yeah.
you just add your name and then add the answer. Like what do we need to know before we can even begin to answer that bigger question about
Mhm.
patterns and impacts and all those things.
Mhm. Poll Everywhere is a really great tool if you have older students, if you have one-to-one device classrooms, it's a really great tool to engage in communication with your students. It is presented anonymously so that you can just, answer what feels good, without fear of being judged. That being said, you should probably, if you have high school or middle school students, watch what they're putting on there before you post it in front of the whole class. I'm trusting you all.
Diana added a question to the chat, and so I just pasted it. I put it into the
Perfect.
so that it's some more population in there. So if anybody's in trouble getting into the poll, just drop your question in the chat, and I'll drop it in there for you.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes. So some of the things we need to know right off the top of the head is what time does the sun rise and set? And there was something else in there that said, right here, what are the negative impacts? Where's the data? So we need to actually see what those are before we can even start answering that question. I like this one about, does health depend on sun exposure and latitude? I love that. All of these are going to be questions that students could have about a big driving question like the one we have. Notice also that our driving question is relevant. It's relevant now. And it's something that isn't made up. This is a real discussion that's happening in our legislature between politicians, between industry, and between scientists and doctors and psychologists, and people are really coming together to debate this and figure out what is the best thing for all of the parties involved, for the economy, for the human health. What is the best way to go about this? So it's a pretty amazing thing that you could get your students thinking and working on something relevant and like happening now, relevant and current. And it's exciting that you can do that through the use of phenomena and through the use of these driving questions. Okay, I'm going to stop share there. So you can go ahead and pull up, there you go, Laura. Pull up this. One of the questions was, what are the rising and setting times? Or basically, what are the patterns of the sun? So we could design an investigation to describe what we see, what we observe, using the tools that we have. If it were with my students, we would spend some time actually thinking about how to design an investigation that way. There's a lot of really teachable moments through designing that. What tools do we have? What technology do we have? And how can we do that? Now, we do not have the benefit of being all in the same place at the same time. And we also have a limited amount of time together tonight. So we're going to design it for you just so we can have some data to collect and then move into the next part of a field investigation. This is not something that I would skip over with my students. I want them involved in designing a field investigation as much as possible. If it is your first one out of the gate, heck yes, you should design it yourself, because you want to make sure that you're hitting all of those pieces that of a high quality field experience, and you want to get used to all of the other stuff that comes along with that. So take time and grow in these scenarios. Okay, so what are the patterns of the sun? We're going to use an investigation to describe what we observe. And we're going to use our smartphones to do that, and a very easy tool called a Google Form. So Google Form, let me see here.
I have the link ready to go.
Go for it then. All right, so Laura's going to pop a link to a Google Form. Here's how it's going to work. There are 2 questions on that form. The first question is, where is the sun compared to the horizon? So the little ball is the sun, the line is the horizon. You're just going to pick which one of those. And then the second question is, where are you on Earth? And in that question, it helps if you're in the United States to do city, state for our next part of our data. So what does the sun look like compared to the horizon? And where are you on Earth? And you're going to need to go outside maybe for this to get to the right location to see. So go ahead and take like 5 minutes to go find a spot outside where you can look for the sun. Do not stare directly at the sun. You know, that's not healthy for your eyeballs. But just try to get a picture of where it is in relation to the horizon and collect that data on the Google Form. And we'll see you back in about 5 minutes, 4:27 and 32 seconds. Laura, it looks like everybody's answered already.
Well, that's efficient.
Yeah, that was so fast.
We should send them back outside for a little more fresh air. That's part of the point.
They're raring to go to figure out where this is even headed.
Well, shall we move on?
Yeah.
Right. That'll give us a couple of minutes to breathe. Now and the end, maybe some more time for questions.
Yeah, so thank you all for collecting that data. We are going to do more with it here in a little bit. So I really appreciate you doing that. It also just shows you how a field investigation can literally start from any phenomena. Here we've got this thing that was in the news. Let's turn it into a phenomena about the patterns of the sun and the impacts on human health. Like, I mean, that's great. Like, here you are going to go on this amazing adventure down in the rainforest, but there are amazing and incredible phenomena everywhere around our schools and in our communities that we can share with our students all the time.
All right. So our time tonight is threefold. We don't have a lot of time, and like Megan said at the very beginning, we're taking, what we would normally use in the period of about 6 hours and really condensing it. So this is kind of like the best of. We're just wanting to highlight a couple things that we think, are really important and powerful bits, foods for thought for you as you're thinking about either your teaching practice in general, or for those of you that are going to be traveling to the Amazon, how this is going to connect back to your teaching practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of field investigations. We are going to look at 3 types of field investigations that you can use as models for designing and conducting field investigations with your students. And for some of you, this may be, older news. For some of you, this may be newer news. And so we're hoping that there are bits and pieces, for whatever reason that you will glean and take away with you tonight as you're thinking about how this will plug into what it is that you're doing in your classroom. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the idea of analyzing and visualizing data. And we've got some ideas to share with you about ways of getting creative, maybe kind of reframing that conversation. And we are going to share just a couple of resources kind of designed to maybe enhance field investigations. Krista, do folks have a link to our field investigations guide? Are they getting a copy? Where does that live?
They're actually, the link has been provided and will be provided again. They're actually getting a hard copy, and most of them have gotten their mailings already.
Okay.
So that should be in their hands shortly if it's not already in their hands.
Perfect. So we could probably share that link tonight too, and we're going to reference this field investigations guide. For folks that are joining us that are not going to be on said trip to Amazon, this guide we provide for free. It's a free download. So this link, is definitely a viable option for, again, pulling some really great ideas back into your teaching practice. If you are interested in getting a hard copy and you're not part of the Amazon group, just feel free to reach out to either Megan or me, and we can absolutely make that happen. So here's the question. What is a field investigation? We don't have a great sense of, the cross-section of folks that are here in terms of, what kind of teaching practice you're coming in from. Some of you are probably science educators, environmental educators. Some of you may have, experience with experiential student-led inquiry-based, learning. But we want to throw this question out to you all, regardless of experience, regardless of where you're coming in from in terms of your practice. And here's the question specifically: what makes something a field investigation? When you're thinking about the pieces of a field experience and the work that you're doing with students, what makes something a field investigation? So we'll give you a minute to just kind of think through your practice, think through the year that you're going to be wrapping up in the next couple of weeks, month-ish. I'm not sure when schools wrap up in other places. But how would you answer this? And we'll just take a couple of ideas in the chat. If you've got more than one, that would be great. We'd love to just kind of get a little discussion going here. That you're really welcome to share out if you would like to just raise your hand. Well, and I'm going to mute myself for just a minute because I've got 4 dogs prancing in the background that are probably really loud. Yeah, so location-based, relevant to students. Yeah, thinking about the application of where they are and what they're doing, kind of the intersection of those things. The concept of real world, right? Things that your students, can relate to, things that connect to who they are as people, the communities that they're coming from, that they're learning in, that they're living in. Taking place outside, not indoors. I see a theme going here. Love it. Outdoor studies, student-led. Yes. Yes. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And that's definitely something to think about. Right. What questions are coming up for students? How are you inviting them into a space of making observations and questioning and kind of using their experiences to really inspire the learning and to further engage them? Collecting observations, collecting data outside. Yeah, for sure. Tied to place. Yeah, absolutely. So here's another question. Are there different types of field investigations? How would you answer that? And this, I know better as an educator than to give a group of people learning a yes or no question. So this is like a yes, and what would be the second part of your response there? What different types exist? And if you don't have a response to that part, that's totally fine. How would you differentiate? And we'll get into this. So if you're like, I really have no idea, Laura, that's totally fine. Okay, biotic, abiotic, I love it. Observational, experimental, yeah, based on what you're noticing compared to collecting, yeah, data, ongoing, single session, that didn't come out very well. Qualitative, quantitative. Yeah, these are absolutely all elements of a film. Nancy, you win the prize. I love it. I love it. Fun versus boring ones. We may have to insert that into the rest of these workshops that we do. Just learning to use all of their senses when observing. Yeah. So if we were, well, I wish we had more time to have this conversation before really getting into the details here. But if we were to take all of your responses and kind of like put them into a grouping, yeah, with tech, without tech. And then kind of think about, the most intentional way of dividing them up. We would land on what we would argue is a group of 3 different ways of approaching an investigation. And so I do know that there are folks that are traveling to the Amazon this summer here, and there are some folks that are not. And so I have designed this part of our conversation. I've tailored it a little bit to the trip that the Amazon folks are going to be taking. So what you're looking at here is an image. It's the same image, obviously, across these three areas of the slide. This is a Google image of the Amazon Conservatory for Tropical Studies that you are going to be visiting. Now, interestingly, this part of the world doesn't have the same like high aerial resolution photography as other things that we've done on Google Earth. So these images are a little bit fuzzy, and I apologize for that, but I thought that it would be relevant. So what we're looking at here is one of the sites that you are going to be visiting a couple of days into your trip. And what we're going to do is kind of think about 3 different types of field investigations. These are all going to be looking at the presence of the cinchona tree, which is where quinine comes from. Quinine is made from the bark. This is one of the most common trees in Peru. And Krista, I don't know if this is, I'm hoping this is something that will be, at least the species will be part of some of the work that you're doing.
This is fantastic, even if it's not.
Okay, good.
I can't answer that. So we'll be doing this when we're down there. This is perfect.
I've never been to Peru, so, so we're looking at 3 different ways of thinking about the presence of this particular tree. And so we're looking at this lens of 3 different types of field investigations: descriptive, comparative, and correlative. And so these are the working descriptions of the different types. This actually comes out of our field investigations guide on page 11. If you're looking at the PDF online, there's a little note here you can see at the very bottom. If you're looking at the actual hard copy of the guide, this is right out of page 5, obviously modified for the Amazon folks. So the mini investigation that we did with the sun at the very start of the workshop was most like a descriptive investigation. We were describing the position of the sun at whatever latitude and longitude you are existing. And so if we want to think about how we want to think about how we could shift this descriptive investigation to become more comparative. The very first lesson in the guide is titled, "What Questions Can I Investigate?" And it really introduces students to these 3 types of investigative questions, again, through this lens of either descriptive, comparative, or correlative. So descriptive investigations are really focused on involving describing parts of a natural system. They are all about gathering baseline information about that system. You might be looking at something like population size. You might be looking at something like the presence or absence of certain species. You might be collecting temporal data. And these investigations really focus on measurable or observable variables that can be represented spatially. We're thinking about maps, written descriptions, estimations, averages, medians, ranges. So you can immediately begin to see some of those math connections too. But the first example here is of a question that would give rise to a descriptive investigation. And that would be, how many cinchona trees are on this research station campus that you'll be visiting? And so you can see that my red line there is just kind of looking at the entire perimeter of the campus. So moving to comparative investigations, these are going to collect similar information, but now you are gathering it from multiple populations. You're looking at multiple locations. You might be thinking about times in order to compare data from each source. So, the example that we did just a minute ago was comparative. We're looking at 2 different locations, or multiple locations, I should say, of the position of the sun on the horizon. So you can see in the second example here, we're using the same research station campus now, and we're just modifying to comparatively examine these 2 different areas for the cinchona trees. In this case, we're looking at maybe like the northern end or the southern end of campus. So correlative investigations are now then, this very last one here, they're measuring multiple variables within the system. And the idea here is that we're looking for patterns, we're looking for relationships between each of these variables. So in the last example, the investigation is now looking at this relationship between maybe the number of these cinchona trees, and we could maybe think about the distance from the buildings on the research station. So yes, sorry, Megan, I'm a step ahead of you there. We have not gotten to that point yet. I apologize. So forget my comment about turning our descriptive into a comparative investigation, and hold that thought, just file it off to the side for just a half second here. So does anyone have questions about these three? Again, this might be, a lens that you're already using and applying to your teaching practice. What we're hoping, whether this is a refresher or new information, is that this kind of gives you a different way of kind of, beginning to frame what it is that you want to build out from the point of, having your students, begin questioning.
So if I can just interject one comment.
Yeah.
Thanks for including this like real world application to the Amazon.
Yeah.
I think for me, wrongly, I've ascribed value to these in a way that I would say that descriptive is easier than correlative or whatever. And I realize that that's a false thing, that we shouldn't be doing that. And one of the things I just wanted to mention is, while we were at the field station, we do work with researchers there. And after the Educator Academy, we're actually piloting a research program for teachers that'll be coming online for next year. And one of the big things we have to do in that work is descriptive work. It's critically important that we do those descriptive types of investigations, because we don't have baseline data at this field station for many, many different species. Ones we know that should be there, or maybe I would be surprised it would be there. So I just wanted to point that out, that I love this continuum, and I love how you've laid it all out. And just, for the teachers that are traveling with us to the Amazon, you're going to be involved in looking at it in all these different ways. So thank you for dialing it in like this.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate hearing a little bit more about what that real world experience will be for, the folks that you have there. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we come back to Megan in a few minutes. But yeah, the idea of using, the descriptive investigation to really open the door for the student questioning that can lead to, having them step a little bit further into helping with the design of a comparative or a correlative. So really understanding that these three exist, but they're also not mutually exclusive in terms of how you're working with students is a big piece of that. So we've talked about our field investigations guide, and I just wanted to talk a little bit. Megan, would you mind, do you have access to the PDF link?
Yes.
You want to pop that in?
I popped it in earlier. You want me to do it again?
Maybe not, if everyone already has it. And we'll provide it, and some of you are getting a hard copy too. So there are lots of different ways of accessing it. The resource that we use for this work, is really a framework for thinking about the scientific practices that scientists use in the field. And I really like, we'll talk a little bit more at the very end about this kind of full collection of guides that we offer and other resources, but a lot of them are very process-based. This one in particular was developed to really help K through 12 teachers think about ways of introducing their students to the very unique and specific methodologies that are used in scientific field research, and really think about the most meaningful ways of guiding them through that process of conducting field investigations using those practices. So in particular, this guide really demonstrates how to use descriptive and comparative methodologies, thinking about field studies, but it's really geared for environmental and natural resource, the environmental and natural resource arenas. So that's one thing I really like about it. It was updated in 2015 to align with all of the NGSS, all the next generation science standards. And so, it's a really, it's something that you can apply to almost every aspect of the work that you're doing with students. It really helps to explore different ways of teaching your students how to question, thinking about ways of, inviting them into knowing more about designing their own stepwise protocols for the work that they're doing, thinking about collecting data, kind of reframing ways of analyzing that data, and really thinking reflectively on the experience. I know I worked almost 20 years in the classroom, and I would say that if I ran out of time doing some field investigation type work, the thing that always dropped off the fastest was the time for reflection. And so I really like how, this guide underscores the importance of that and offers, examples for ways of integrating that and continuing to make that a more consistent part of your practice. So again, this is something that, if you have questions about, we also do, our full scale workshops on Field Investigations Guide a couple of times a year. So you're always welcome to reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk with you a little bit more. But I'm going to turn this back over to Megan.
Yeah.
Does anyone have questions? Oh, sorry. Does anyone have
Lara.
questions or musings or burning desires of the universe at this point before we move on? All right, Megan, go for it.
Okay, great. So we went through this guide and we sort of compiled this short list of things that every high quality field investigation should have. And like we started at the beginning, we started with some kind of phenomena, and we worked from that phenomena to collect data. Like there was a reason we needed to go collect data. And maybe it wasn't super compelling to you in this particular scenario, but this is some sort of real, authentic data collection that there is a reason to do it. We're not just doing it because the sun's out. We're doing it because this is something we're trying to get more information to answer a question. So we have some sort of compelling reason. Then we actually go out and collect that data. We're not just going to pull it up on the internet or pull it up on Google. We, as a classroom of students, are going to go collect that data. We're going to record that. We're going to analyze that. We're going to use that to answer the investigative question and to report out. The other piece that I think is really key, and you all touched on it earlier when we asked what are the parts of, what makes something a high impact field investigation, that was outdoors. Outdoors is so important. I could probably talk for another 10 years about all of the benefits of taking students outdoors, not only to their mental and emotional health, but also to their physical health. It is incredibly beneficial to take your students outdoors. It also is helping them connect to their place. The more time they spend outside, the more time they have a sense of relationship with the place that they're in. And then a community partner like the Morpho Institute, like some of these other amazing organizations just right in your communities, is key to making your field investigation successful. And it's such almost a keystone piece of making it a sustainable thing from year to year, that every year you get to take those kids out and collect the data. Having that community partner support is big time. Okay, I promised that we'd come back to the data. Let's go back to the data. Okay, so we just learned from Laura that there are kind of 3 buckets of field investigations. The descriptive, which is kind of what we did, where we just said, this is where the sun is right now. And we're just describing that moment in time. Then we're saying, okay, let's move toward a comparative investigation because we're looking for patterns, right? We're looking for over space or over time. And so let's move to a comparative investigation. Well, that's going to require us all to share our data together. So we've created a mapping activity that's going along with it. Now, this is the spreadsheet. This is the form that you already filled out. So please don't fill it out again. I'm going to show you how to turn that data into a map. And then we can look at that data in a couple of different ways and use that for a comparison to find out what the patterns are of the sun are. Now, we've all been to middle school before. We know the patterns of the sun, but we're going to look at some data and just kind of get some information about that. So, Lara, we're going to try this.
I'm here for you.
We're going to try it.
I can pull it up too, but
yeah, we're going to give it a shot.
I'll be your plan B.
Okay, so I say we're going to try it because my computer is old and we're never going to know how she's going to react today. So here it goes. My sound may cut out. I may have to turn off my video. You just let me know if it's hard to hear me and I will fix it. So the beauty of using a Google form is that in the Google form, it collects all of that information in one place. So it already sets up that data table for you. So if you have younger students who aren't yet ready to do the table setup side of things, boom, here it goes. It sets it up for you. Just making sure I still okay
Yeah,
on sound?
well, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, you're all that matters, Laura.
Can everyone
I'm just
else hear
kidding.
Megan?
Yes,
Yeah, I'm
we can
hearing
hear
you
you.
just fine.
I'm totally joking. Okay, so here's one way that we can look at the data. And we could sort this data in a bunch of, we could do it by state. We could do it by, thinking about alphabetical order. We could do it by number. We could sort all this data in a bunch of different ways. We could even add, and this is going to be a trick here, we could even add a little picture of the sun based on that number. Yeah. And so that number kind of tells you, oh, that's where the sun is. So now we can look at these and see, oh, this is where all of the low suns are, and this is where all of the high suns are. And starting to go through that work of like visualizing data, we could then have our students represent this in a way that makes sense, like on a map. So still good? Everybody still good? Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to use another tool. Now here's the deal. I recognize that this is a totally not a good way of teaching. But I'm going to show you all these tools really, really fast. Laura and I are here to support you. We're showing you these tools just because we have the tech right in front of us right now. This isn't maybe the way that we would do it in our classrooms. We're really just showing you this is how this could be done. You could do this next bit physically, like you could build a map of the space where you're doing your comparative study. You could actually do a physical map on the board where students are adding their data to the map. I'm using this digital tool. If you at any point decide, hey, there was that one digital map Megan showed me in that workshop 8 years ago, you reach out and I will teach you how to do this, okay? It could be tomorrow, it could be forever from now, whatever. You reach out and I will show you how to do this. Right now, I'm going to do it super fast, and I recognize that that is really not okay. It's not something you have to know how to do right now. Just a cool thing. Okay, so on Google, they have something called Google My Maps, where you can create a map, and then, this is the cool part, import data from a spreadsheet you've created. So I can import that information that we just collected. Waiting for my computer. And lead me through how to put like the information on the map. I want to put it at the location, and I want the title markers to be how would you describe the position of the sun, and I hit finish. It's going to upload all those little points right there, and I can set the labels to be the numbers that you placed. Now they're kind of hard to see, but if I zoom in, we can see that here in the west, we've got a couple over here in the west. We're at 1, so very high in the sky. Colorado or New Mexico, we've got a 1. Then we get over here in the Midwest, there's a 2 and a 2. And then we get over here and we're at 4s and a 4. So we are already starting to see some comparisons and make some comparisons between where the sun is in the sky in different parts across the United States. So how cool is that? That very quickly you can start to visualize that data in a way that students can actually start to pick out patterns just by using a map. That's really fun. So I wanted to share that with y'all. And again, if at any point you're like, oh man, there was that really cool thing. Yes, you just reach out. We'll help you. We'll help you figure it out. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. I love it. Sometimes technology works, and when it works, it's so cool, and you get to use some really great ways to explore data with students. And And that's what Lara's going to talk about next, is that data visualization piece.
Thanks, Megan. Sorry, every time I wish Zoom would change their ways. Every time I reshare, everything gets moved around again. I have to put everything back. So I think I'm officially good to go. So thinking about the essence of field investigation design, I want you to remember that the whole point here is to make learning impactful. I mean, that's what it is that we're doing, right? That's what we're inspired to do, and we're working with our students and always pursuing. But it also has to be equitable. So I want you to think about who it is that you're teaching and how that information about those particular people might inform how you're teaching them. So I would encourage you to really walk with intention around kind of thinking about this invitation to your students to come into learning spaces which really live at this intersection of who they are as learners, the experiences that they've had as people, and their identities as people. Who are these young people that we're working with? And I don't know what the cross section of grade levels is that you work with, but every single individual person that you are teaching has something different to bring to the table. So we have been talking here about the use of data visualization as a way of really engaging our students in that learning process. Megan shared this really fun way of kind of inviting them into a space of looking at data a little bit differently. But another idea, it's kind of like a twofold thought. Another idea for really framing this part of your practice is thinking about ways of offering choice and voice. And those are two words that we talk a lot about in education. But really thinking about how you're inviting students to then showcase what it is that they've learned. So we're thinking about, one, how we are inviting them to look at data and reframing that. And then the second thing here is thinking about ways of inviting them to share the data that they've collected in creative and, rad ways. So think about how they might be able to represent data in ways that are meaningful to them. So here's an example. This is a project that is from a group of 8th graders in Massachusetts. It's the Heath School, if any of you are familiar with this. And these students were asked to analyze climate data through their own visual storytelling. I love this so much. The first graph on the left, you'll see that the students showed rising temperatures impacting northern bird migration. And they really wanted to demonstrate the migration pattern of the birds. So showing north to south movement, as well as the increase in the amount of birds over time. The colored tissue paper was very intentional. They were very excited about it. It represents fire. They really wanted to symbolize climate change in a way that was kind of three-dimensional, and hint at how this intersection of fire and food shortage together is really impacting migration. In the upper right-hand corner, the students who created this graph really wanted their art to be eye-catching. And I should mention that, and we'll share this link at the end, or I guess with some of our post-workshop follow-up. But the collection of these particular pieces sits on a website, and you can see the graphs, but there's a little drop-down menu for each one of these, and so you can actually read the description that the students have included, that they've created, that talks a little bit more about their decisions for some of the colors and textures and designs of the graph, on an XY axis coordinate system. There are also of the things talking about their work. So we're looking at the two-dimensional representations here, but think about this, additional piece where they're talking about it as well. So I just wanted to give you the background and also name the fact that some of the wording that I'm using here comes from some of these descriptions. So this group was very proud of the fade and ombre effect that they achieved in helping bring these bodies of data together, which I just think is really sweet. And then in the words of the student who created the graph in the very, very center, quote, "The reason I decided to make the water covering the building is because I feel like using buildings this way shows the drastic change and how fast the sea level is rising during these years. It really makes me understand it a lot more because sure, you hear sea levels are rising, but sharing it in this way helps show how real these issues are. I wanted to show the impact of sea level rising because I think people need to know. If a place where people live is underwater, those people have lost their homes. Imagine if that happened to you. And this is why I made this poster, to spread and get more awareness on the effects of sea level rise. So, end quote. Thinking through this lens is how we help create personalized learning experiences for our students. And it really, if you think about it, makes for more effective instruction. What we're doing here is we're tailoring the learning to the need and learning styles of your students. So I'm thinking about all of the work that you do without knowing where you teach, who you're teaching, what you're teaching, and thinking about maybe this layer of, work in the Amazon this summer and some of the work that you're going to have your students do as part of the design of field investigations coming home. I would encourage you to really explore this, this call, this invitation to just kind of think about this a little bit differently. How can you get your students to really add some creativity to how they are sharing what they've learned as well? So Megan, I'm going to hand this back over to you.
Great. First of all, how's everybody doing? We doing all right? We're going solid now.
We are solid. Thank you. You guys are awesome.
For a little while. Everybody going good? Okay, good. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so one of my favorite things that happens is that a teacher will come to me and be like, yeah, but I can't take my kids outside because my administration is like, oh, you're not learning anything out there, or you're just playing, or whatever. This isn't they need to be doing their reading and their math, and they need to be getting their test scores up, and X and XYZ. And it's like, okay, yeah, but what are you doing out there? And this is my favorite question to answer, is because you're doing everything out there. And specifically, if we look at those 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards, those science and engineering practices, those disciplinary core ideas, those cross-cutting concepts, we can pick out and see how many of these things our students are doing when we're outside doing field investigation, collecting data. All of this is engaging the students in these 3 dimensions of NGSS. We're asking questions, we're defining problems, we're out there, we're collecting data, we're analyzing that data, we're interpreting that data, we're planning and carrying out an investigation to collect that data. We're then going to be thinking about how to explain what we're seeing. We might even engage in argument from evidence to argue our point of this is what it means and here's why. We're going to be using mathematics. We're going to be probably making models to understand what it is that we're seeing. So all of those science and engineering practices, we're engaging in all of those. Students are going to have to use those cross-cutting concepts, patterns, cause and effect, scale, proportion, and quantity. We're going to have to use those to make sense of what we're seeing when we're out there investigating. Those skills are so important for students in sense making, for students in like all areas, not just science. When they see something new or trying to understand something, boom, those cross-cutting concepts come in. And a lot of those we do without even thinking of it. So making that visible for your students is really key. Making that obvious for your students, like calling it out, is really important. And then those disciplinary core ideas, those are the content, that's the pieces that you're, the specific information that you're trying to get your students to learn and understand. And maybe they're coming to you with some disciplinary core ideas already firmly in place. So they're going to be accessing that prior knowledge to then explain this new thing that they're viewing. Whoa, like you're just doing all of this amazing work out there. So if you have that problem of somebody coming up to you while you have students outside saying, hey, what are you doing out there? It doesn't look like you're really, they're really learning. You'd be like, oh, actually, here's all that we're doing. Yeah, all of this, plus social emotional learning, plus we're getting our 21st century skills built up. I mean, what would you like to talk about? We're doing a lot out here. So you might just want to leave us alone. We got a lot to do. So that's what our field investigations guide tries to point out, is where are those science and engineering practices, where are those cross-cutting concepts, the content, the disciplinary core ideas, that's kind of up to you. And that's the beauty of doing a field investigation with our field investigation guide, is that you get to build it so that it makes sense for the content that you teach. So you don't have to use an off-the-shelf thing you get to make it so that it makes sense for the content that you teach and is relevant to current events or what's going on in your community. That's so great and so freeing to be able to follow your students' interest and follow what's going on right there in your community to make it super relevant and connected. So students feel like, oh yeah, this actually matters. And this is a good way to do that. Speaking of constructing explanations or engaging in argument from evidence, that's the next big piece that goes from field investigation. We've gone and we've collected data, or sorry, we've asked the question, we've collected data, we've maybe asked more questions, collected more data. And now we're going to move on into, all right, we need to make a claim that answers the question, and we need to back that claim up with evidence. So if you go ahead and go to the next slide, Laura, I'll show you how I think about that in my brain. So our claim is backed up by reasoning, right? And those reasonings come from the evidence that we've collected. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. That reasoning part, the middle part, that's really hard for students because a lot of that reasoning, the what it means, this is our inferences, our scientific principles, that explain how the evidence leads to the claim. A lot of this happens just automatically. For an example, there might be like, oh, okay, so the molecules are moving faster in this water, and this water is warmer, and the molecules are moving faster, and so the dye spreads faster. Well, a lot of that reasoning is going to just be the unseen part. That's the stuff that just happens automatically in their brain. And they might go straight to the water is warmer without saying all of those pieces that led them to why they think the water is warmer. So reasoning is a really tricky one. And I like to start backwards. I like to start with the evidence. So if Laura, you want to click the button to the next thing here, it'll do a little animation. I like to start with what they observed. Let's make a list. What evidence did we observe, right? And starting there, move toward reasoning. So thinking about what does that evidence tell us? And then that supports a claim that we can make. Helping students see it from that point of view instead of this, what is out there right now is claim, evidence, reasoning, claim, evidence, reasoning, claim, evidence, reasoning. That's great, but it's not really how our brains process the information. And it really makes it difficult for us to see the reasoning part because it happens so quickly and it happens almost automatically without us really understanding what's going on there. And I have some examples in a couple of slides, but if you go to the next slide, I can explain what I mean. So there are a lot of different challenges with evidence and reasoning and like distinguishing between the two of them. Both evidence and reasoning are justification for the claim. They're the why I can make that claim. That's why they're so easy to get confused. Students might go ahead and click through. They might think that the reasoning is implied. Well, I know the water's warmer because the thermometer says it's warmer. Okay. Like that's not implied. You need to say that you've collected that piece of data, that you've said that you found out that the water is warmer. You can see that on a piece of information. It's not implied reasoning. And the next one is if they combine the evidence and the reasoning. Sometimes students will just smush them all together and have a hard time understanding how to untangle them from each other and see like, oh, this little piece here is evidence, not reasoning. And, or this is the more common one, this is not evidence, this is reasoning. And I am making assumptions or I'm making like informational claims about this evidence that I'm seeing without actually citing the evidence. That's a fun one. I love seeing that one on with student papers. And then go to the next one. The last one is they might just omit data entirely, either in their collecting or their reporting. Maybe they forgot to collect some data that would help them with their reasoning, or maybe they did collect it, they just forgot to report it on that claim evidence reasoning piece. So all of these little pieces are important: claim, evidence, and reasoning. But I like to look at them backwards, starting with the evidence, building our reasoning around what that evidence means, and then that supports our claim. So moving in that direction. Let's look at some fun, common, weird ones, right? So here is a piece of information. In the chat, identify the evidence. Y'all are practiced in reading graphs, so make sure you read all the information on this graph. What is the evidence on this graph? What do you see? And this could be titles, this could be colors, this could be interesting data points. What do you see here? Just any evidence. I'm only asking for evidence, right? I'm not asking for it to prove anything. I'm not asking for it to reason anything. I'm not asking it to support any claim. I just want evidence. But it's hard, right, Andy? It's hard. We look at it and we instantly want to move to interpretation. That's what I'm talking about. That's why students struggle with this. We all struggle with this. Just picking out the evidence. Yep, each data point serves as evidence. Correct. So what evidence do you see? I see that in 2007, 11 pounds, 800, 11 pounds of mozzarella cheese per capita was consumed in 2007. I also see that in 2000, it was significantly less, at like 9.3 pounds of mozzarella cheese per capita. Whoa. I see evidence that 700 engineering doctorates were awarded in the US in 2009. That's evidence. We're not looking for reason. We're just looking for evidence, right? So this is a fun thing to do with your students: identify the evidence, throw up a silly graph, have them just pick out pieces of evidence, and then talk about the silly graph. Evidence is the data. That's right. That's just the information. We're not looking for claims. We're not looking for reasoning. And then afterwards, talking about the silly graph. There's a whole website of these silly graphs. This one is hilarious. Like thinking about, like Andy was saying, correlation, or like maybe we need to eat more mozzarella cheese and our engineering degrees will go up. Maybe that would be great. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about correlation and causation with my students. Let's explore all of that together so that we can talk like scientists in a fun and exciting way. It's just fun, right? Like this is a really fun way to explore this concept and getting them to understand what is evidence. So looking at this, tell me what's the evidence that you see, and getting them to practice that, not making any conclusions or claims. What is the evidence you see? Okay, next. All right, here's a picture. Two happy kids. Here's a picture. What's happening here? Make a claim. What's happening here? And I'm going to go on mute for just a second while you think about that. When you have an idea, throw it into the chat. Make a claim. Yeah, so just any claim, it's okay. The wilder, the better. Just a claim. Now I'm not looking for evidence at this point. just make a claim. What's happening in this picture? There's a fan. Yeah. Love it. Excellent. So with my students, I'll have them make wild and crazy claims. Like, what do you think is happening in this crazy picture? And yeah, I love it. They have, it's like the little, what are those called, Lara? The little spindly parts of the fungus?
Mycelium.
Yes. Yeah.
You've got a mycelial problem.
I love it. That's my favorite one now. I like the fan on the floor too. So showing your kids some crazy picture with not very much information and asking them to make a claim. Then pausing and saying, is there any more evidence you need to understand what's happening in this picture? So then having them ask questions. If I can answer them, that's great. If not, let's move on, seeing if that changes their claim. And then I tell them the true story. In this particular picture, this was taken in mere moments before these two children were struck by lightning. Just they were out on in their back yard area, and bam, they were struck by lightning. And it literally, they both survived this particular incident, but this was just taken right before that happened. What a crazy, like, who could have come up with that thing, right? Like, who could have come up with that just from this picture, just from this very small amount of evidence? This is going to show to your students how important it is to gather lots of data about what they're seeing, about what they're observing, so that they can make a solid claim. And that if they only have a little bit of data, that their reasoning is going to be weak and have holes in it, and their claim may or may not be correct or accurate. So lots and lots of data, lots and lots of ways of looking at this thing. Jumping to conclusions is as silly as trying to figure out what's going on in a still frame photo image of two people sitting in their backyard with their hair standing on end. Who knows what's going on in that situation, right? Okay, I think that the next little bit here is just showing you the matrix of how you should progress, because I'm not sure what age groups y'all have. I just want to point this out, that at that K2 grade band, the very young kids, they actually only need to support a claim with evidence, and the reasoning isn't there yet. And that's because cognitively, it's very difficult for them to make that leap of reasoning that supports a claim. So if they've got evidence that supports a claim, that's what we're looking for. Then as we move from 3-5 up into middle school, high school, that's where we start thinking about how evidence, the reasoning behind how evidence backs that claim. And if a claim is going to be well backed by evidence, if the reasoning is supported by evidence, that's going to be up into that middle school, high school level. So this is in the NGSS, it's here, and it's an important piece. Okay, we all good? We clear? Clear as mud? That's a lot. Any questions? All quiet on the front. Okay. Laura, I kind of want to move into this next bit here. Do you think we have time for that, or no?
I think so.
Okay. So in our field investigations guide are 2 case studies, 2 examples of field investigations. We're just going to look at one together. And while you look at it, we're not going to do breakout rooms. We're just going to, have a moment to just sort of look at this and think about what it is that this project is doing. So this case study is called Project CAT. It was done right here in Central Washington State. It's called Cougars and Teaching. And I'm going to let you just explore this case study while you're reading it or kind of skimming it. I want you to think about those 4 questions that are there on the screen, and we'll leave those on the screen and I'll throw them into the chat as well. What are your initial thoughts about this? Does it add any value to student learning? How are the students integrating math and science? And how could you use what you've just read in your future exciting endeavors? So I'm going to throw that in. And thank you, Terry, for that resource. That is a great resource. I'm going to throw that into the chat. I'll throw the questions into the chat as well. And just go ahead and take a moment to sort of browse through that and think about those four questions.
Left. Is anyone still reviewing the case study out of curiosity? We're good.
I think we're good.
Yeah, good. So we're curious about things that are coming up for you. Initial thoughts about the field investigation, and Kelsey, I really like what you are asking here. What scaffolding was provided for students who had not previously plotted coordinates before? What are their tech skills? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, this is such a cool project, right? Like getting kids involved in tagging at cougars, tagging and tracking cougars. Like, what? Think about the insurance on that, right? Like,
yeah, I have other questions. Yeah, amazing opportunity for students relevant to their lives. Yeah, here in Connecticut, we are experiencing a massive increase in bear population and bear interactions. Yeah, I see a field investigation opportunity. I think we do too, Terry.
Hey, Terry, I have a school over here in Central Washington that has their first graders working on bear and human interactions. First grade.
Yeah, that is so cool. I just wished my students lived in the area where we could actually get involved in it. It's more in the northeast corner of the state as opposed to central and eastern Connecticut, but
yeah.
super cool.
Lori, I really like your comment about just kind of the contributions of this work to the greater good, the meaningful application of skills. Yeah, think about how amazing of an experience it is for students to get involved with something like this that couldn't be any more real time. Yeah, how do we manage to cover all the NGSS standards?
Yep. Yes, that is such a great question, because we know that these kinds of investigations are going to do more for our students than just like making sure that we cover standard after standard after standard after standard. Like, this is going to engage them for life. This is going to make it home to the dinner table. They're going to be talking about this for a long period of time. Oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what we did today. So what I have is I have teachers who do this over the year in little chunks of time throughout the year. I have teachers who do this, like they just put 2 weeks aside, and they're like, these 2 weeks, that's all we're doing. It's this field investigation. We're collecting this data. We're going out every day. We're doing X, Y, and Z. We're analyzing it. That's it. That's all we're doing. There are several different ways of making sure that you're still connecting with all those standards. Another great way is partnering with other teachers that are teaching that same grade level, right? So let's say I need my students writing, or I need my students doing some data analysis, or I need my students looking up some social impacts of this. Connect with your ELA teachers, connect with your math teachers, connect with your social studies teachers, get them all involved in this big project and farm out some of that work, because some of that work is going to hit those other standards in the Common Core. It's going to hit those other social studies standards. Working with them so that you're collecting the authentic data and helping students ask the question that then they can go out and research and write about and analyze. Man, that is amazing.
And the comment here about having students go outside of the building and the possibility of interrupting, I think that's an amazing conversation to have, to bring to the table. I think just open the dialogue. Here's the idea that I have. Where are all of your thoughts around this? Would this work? How would this work? How would you want to be involved? Broach the subject, with the team you're working with.
And with your admin.
And I know, yes, yes. I taught AP biology for a really long time, and you know, I know that that feels a lot more constrained in terms of the amount of extra time that you have for things. But I think some of Megan's suggestions here about cross-pollinating with other classes, and just finding, you know, small opportunities, are really wonderful.
Yeah, Laura, you want to go to the last slide there? Because we're running really short on time and I want to honor these folks' time. It's getting late for folks. They've got evening stuff going on. They've got families. So I want to make sure we honor that time.
Yeah.
And we are here for all of this. We love all this conversation. And that's why we're throwing our email addresses up there on the screen and our website. All of our resources are open to you. They are free to use for educators. They're right there. And please get in touch with us. We'd love to support you and hear about all of your successes and help you through any struggles. And greatly appreciate your time this evening.
Ditto.
Laura?
Yeah, this has been a true honor. I wish we could be in person, but here we are, and there's a lot of beauty that comes from being able to come together, you know, from so many different areas of this country. So it's lovely to meet you all and hear a little bit about what you're doing, and we'd love updates. We'd love to stay in touch. And yeah, for those of you traveling to the Amazon this summer, I wish we were going with you.
For sure.
Well, I want to thank you both so much, and PEI. This has just been such an amazing resource, but then the added bonus of getting to work with people like you. And I just wish that all of us could like migrate to Washington State and be able to have those face-to-face meetings. But just a wealth of resources, everybody. We will be digging into this in the Educator Academy and just continue to build this partnership with PEI. And the dream is at some point to get one of the facilitators into the Amazon with us in coming years, because I just think this is just such good conversations. And thank you for giving us this wonderful introduction. And I know we're all really hungry for more now, so we'll have to get you on the lineup for the fall and dig deeper into all of this. So thank you both, Megan and Laura, for a great session. It was terrific.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, we will have recorded this, everybody, and we'll be getting the link out to you. I've been keeping track of the resources, and I'll pull those, and I'll coordinate with Megan and Laura too for any additional links and things we can send out to some of the technology and things like that also. So thanks both. Everybody have a lovely evening, and thanks for hanging in with us for an hour and a half tonight. It was great.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.